This is Audible.
Brilliance Audio presents the unabridged recording of Hillary's America by Dinesh D'Souza, performed by James Foster. The mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their back, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately by the grace of God. Thomas Jefferson. Chapter 1. The Hillary Enigma. Secrets of the Democratic Party. To vice industrious, but to nobler deeds timorous and slothful. John Milton on the Devil Belial, Paradise Lost. To understand Hillary, we must solve the Hillary Enigma. The Hillary Enigma is why anyone, any American, any Democrat, even Bill, would consider voting for her. Yes, I know she wants to be the first woman president, but women across the country in high positions and in low are doing things, accomplishing things. This woman has been in public life for decades, and yet she has accomplished nothing. In a classic case of nepotism, Hillary was appointed to head the task force on national health care reform during Clinton's first term. The plan was so half-baked and presented so poorly that even Democrats shunned it, and the whole scheme collapsed and had to be withdrawn. Hillary served as a U.S. Senator from New York, but did not propose a single important piece of legislation. Her record is literally a blank slate. Liberal blogger Marcos Melitsas admits that she doesn't have a single memorable policy or legislative accomplishment to her name. Despite traveling millions of miles as Secretary of State, Hillary negotiated no treaties, secured no agreements, prevented no conflicts. In short, she accomplished nothing. Lack of accomplishment is one thing, deceit is quite another. Everyone who has followed her career knows that Hillary is dishonest to the core, a congenital liar, as columnist William Safire once put it. The writer Christopher Hitchens titled his book about the Clintons, No One Left to Lie To. Even Hollywood mogul David Geffen, an avid progressive, said a few years ago of the Clintons, "Everybody in politics lies, but they do it with such ease, it's troubling." She said her mother named her after the famed climber Sir Edmund Hillary, until someone pointed out that Hillary was born in 1947, and her namesake only became famous in 1953. On the campaign trail in 2008, Hillary said she had attempted as a young woman to have applied to join the Marines, but they wouldn't take her because she was a woman and wore glasses. In fact, Hillary, at this stage of life, detested the Marines and would never have wanted to join. She also said a senior professor at Harvard Law School discouraged her from going there by saying, "We don't need any more women." If this incident actually occurred, one might expect Hillary to have identified the professor. Certainly it would be interesting to get his side of the story, but she never has, suggesting it's another made-up episode. As First Lady, she claimed to know nothing about the Travelgate firings when the evidence showed she ordered them herself. Later, on the 2008 campaign trail, she repeatedly told a story about how she had been under sniper fire and ran for cover when her plane landed in Tuzla, Bosnia. Video footage, however, showed there was no sniper fire, and, in fact, Hillary was greeted on the tarmac by a child who read her a poem. She blamed the Benghazi attacks on an internet video when she knew that was a fable. This is a highly abbreviated list. She is more than just a liar. She and her husband Bill are corrupt and known to be corrupt, going back to their Arkansas days. Just prior to leaving the White House, the Clintons pardoned a notorious fugitive who had fled the country to escape prosecution on racketeering and tax fraud. Pardons don't come free. The man's family and friends poured millions of dollars into the Clintons' coffers in exchange. This was too much even for Hamilton Jordan, Jimmy Carter's chief of staff. Jordan said the Clintons are not a couple, but a business partnership. Every move they make is part of their grand scheme to claw their way to the very top. Jordan dubbed the Clintons the first grifters, a term used in the Great Depression to describe fast-talking con artists who roamed the countryside, always one step ahead of the law, moving on before they were held accountable for their schemes and half-truths. The Wall Street Journal reports that during Hillary's tenure as Secretary of State, some 60 companies that lobbied the State Department donated more than $26 million to the Clinton Foundation. At least 44 of those 60 companies also participated in philanthropic projects valued at $3.2 billion that were set up through a wing of the foundation called the Clinton Global Initiative. In some cases, the Journal reports, donations came after Mrs. Clinton took action that helped a company. In other cases, the donation came first. In some instances, donations came before and after. In 2012, for example, Hillary lobbied the Algerian government to let GE build power plants in that country. A month later, GE gave between $500,000 and $1 million to the foundation. The following September, GE got the contract. This is how Hillary conducts government policy. She is ruthless. She is grasping. She appears to have little empathy or concern for people. She is old and mean, and even her laugh is a witch's cackle. There is almost nothing appealing about her. How then could she be the first choice of progressive Democrats and the apparent front-runner for winning the presidency in November 2016? The Hillary enigma is very different than the Obama enigma. The enigma of Obama was, who is this guy? In 2008, Obama came out of nowhere. Very little was known about his past. What little was known was mostly camouflage. So there was an understandable appetite to learn about him. Moreover, Obama was intriguing. His story generated obvious interest. As an immigrant, I was fascinated by Obama's background, his charisma, his objectives. I wrote 2 books, The Roots of Obama's Rage and Obama's America, trying to explain Obama and predict what he would do. I predicted he was an anti-colonialist in his father's image, and that he would seek to remake America by reducing its wealth and power. Many people, even many conservatives, were initially baffled by my interpretation of this strange man. Only now, 8 years later, do most people see that I was largely correct. With Hillary, however, there is no guesswork about her background, her personality, or her ideology. We all know who this broad is. She has been part of our public life for a generation now. Not only are we all too familiar with her, we are sick of her. Even Democrats seem mildly nauseated. Why else would so many of them turn to the Rip Van Winkle candidacy of Bernie Sanders? Normally, an out-of-it socialist who just woke up from a 20-year nap would not be a serious contender in the Democratic Party. Just yesterday, Bernie was sleeping on his neighbor's couch, unable to pay his own rent. But just as Democrats in 2008 turned to Obama because they wanted anyone but another Clinton, this year many have turned to Bernie because they want anyone but Hillary. Yet enough Democrats voted for Hillary, and she received sufficiently robust backing from the Democratic and progressive establishment, that the success of her candidacy was never really in doubt. Even when Bernie got the votes, Hillary got the delegates. From the beginning, Bernie seemed to be running a show candidacy, designed to fade at the appropriate moment and become part of the Hillary coronation pageant. Hillary marched inexorably toward the nomination, even while shunting aside the risks of an FBI investigation. While some Republicans have long suspected the FBI would recommend an indictment that would end her candidacy, Hillary has operated on the premise that the Obama Justice Department won't indict her, the Democratic Party's frontrunner and Obama's presumptive successor. So far, she's proven right. Even in the unlikely event she is indicted, I expect her to slog on with her trademark tenacity, hoping to deal with the problem after she wins the presidency. Yet when is the last time a major political party nominated someone who has been investigated for corruption so many times and with an ongoing FBI inquiry. Nixon, of course, was impeached and resigned in disgrace, but there was no investigation and no impeachment prior to his 1972 re-election. Nixon, up to that point, had a spotless record, while Hillary's record could only be described as very, very spotty. Yet she has a whole team rooting for her. The movement behind Hillary. So the Hillary enigma is actually the enigma of her supporters, the Democratic Party and the progressive movement. That's why this book isn't just about Hillary. It is also about the party and ideological movement that propel her forward. I wrote about Obama as an individual because that is the best way to understand him. I'm writing about Hillary as the head of a movement or gang because that is the best way to understand her and what she represents. I call this book about Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party the secret history because the story I tell is true and yet will come as a surprise. Did you know about the Democratic president who is the founder of modern progressivism and also responsible for the revival of the Ku Klux Klan? What about the most popular Democratic president of the 20th century who blocked anti-lynching laws and for more than a decade cut deals with racists to exclude blacks from government programs? Then there is the president who is the hero of the civil rights laws, the same fellow that called blacks niggers and said he wanted to keep them confined to the Democratic plantation. Hillary places herself in this progressive tradition, and in a sense, she belongs there. She's just as bad, actually worse, than her shameful predecessors. It's an eye-opening story. The facts told here, both about history and about Hillary's story, are indisputable, and yet they are scarcely known to most people. Until I researched this book, I didn't know them all myself. That's because I'm a victim, as you are, of a progressive cover-up. The cover-up is the work of progressives in education and the media. The progressives are part of the Democratic team. They are, in fact, the ideologues of the party. They have been given a very specific assignment: to bury the truth and spin a lie to sell their team's political merchandise. This they have assiduously and effectively carried out. Progressives can be counted on to respond with outrage to this book, not because what I say is false, but rather because it is true. For years, I bought into the lie, as have most conservatives and Republicans. If you ask most people on the right, they will say, the Democratic Party used to be a good party made up of good people. The leaders of the Democratic Party were stalwarts like FDR, Harry Truman, and John F. Kennedy. This party was patriotic and principled, and the disagreements of American politics were not disagreements of goals, but of means. Unfortunately, of late, so the right-wing narrative continues, the Democrats have changed. At some point, whether it be Jimmy Carter in 1980 or Obama in 2008, the Democratic Party lost its moorings and became radicalized. It became the party that we know today. Basically, the story of the Democrats is a story of how a basically good bunch of people went astray. The Democrats, of course, tell a different story. This story has two separate versions, both of which I deal with in this book. The first version is that the Democrats have always been the good guys. This story is the equivalent of the defense lawyer who says, "My client is not guilty and has always been, as he is now, an upstanding citizen." This is the portrait of the Democratic Party that will be on full display at the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. In a sense, this entire book is a refutation of what will be presented there that week. There we'll hear about how the Democrats are the party of racial equality, social justice, and economic opportunity. This is the moral basis for the party's claim to rule. Democrats, the mantra goes, are the party of the common man, the ordinary person. For 200 years, Democrats have been looking out for the little guy, including historically marginalized groups like women, blacks, Hispanics, and other minorities. Where would these people be without the Democratic Party to protect them and secure their basic rights? Democrats are the party of equal rights, civil rights, and human dignity. Democrats, the mantra continues, support not only racial and social justice, but also economic justice. In other words, widely shared prosperity and Obama's fair share. Economic justice is the centerpiece of Hillary's 2016 campaign. Why, she asks, should the fat cats, the top 1%, take the lion's share of the profits that accrue from American productivity? Why should they be permitted to cause so much inequality? In Hillary's view, government is the instrument that takes from those at the very top and redistributes to the rest of us. Interestingly, Democrats say they are not merely the party that did great things in the past, they are also the party of the future. That's why most Democrats like to be called progressives. The term links them with progress. At one time, Democrats called themselves liberals until the term fell into disrepute. Progressive is now the preferred label. Voting for progressive Democrats, we will hear, assures that America's future will be better than America's past. By contrast, Democrats insist, the Republican Party is the party of racism and reaction. The Democrats' prime exhibit is the GOP presidential candidate, Donald Trump. We hear that Trump is completely beyond the pale because he is a racist and a fascist. He represents the rotten core of the Republican Party, the crazy bigoted uncle who has come out of the basement and taken over the party, embarrassing the hosts who had attempted to keep him hidden away from sight. Listen to progressive darling Senator Elizabeth Warren, who tweeted recently that Trump incites supporters to violence and built his campaign on racism, sexism, and xenophobia. Warren added, "There's more enthusiasm for @real Donald Trump among leaders of the KKK than leaders of the political party he now controls." Robert Reich, Labor Secretary under Bill Clinton, writes, "Viewing Donald Trump in light of the fascists of the first half of the 20th century helps explain what he is doing and how he is succeeding." While Warren and Reich both suggest that Republicans are uncomfortable with their association with Trump, the broader Democratic indictment goes beyond Trump and extends to the GOP as a whole. Recently, the Democratic National Committee sent out a fundraising email which branded Trump supporters as bigots and Confederate sympathizers and insisted that these are the values of the GOP. In this view, Republicans represent rich white guys in opposition to women, minorities, and everyone else. Those guys typically run big corporations, so the GOP is the party of corporate America. When wealth is created in America, the corporations and rich guys swoop in and steal it, depriving workers and the community of their fair share. Republicans are the bad guys who have to be brought to heel. Progressives say that, of course, Republicans like to be called conservative. The term in this lexicon means conserving bigotry and white privilege. Republicans today are in the tradition of their ancestors who stole the land from the Indians, enslaved and oppressed blacks, and blocked immigrants from coming to this country. No wonder the GOP is so strong in the South. That's the ancestral home of racism, and that's where most racists live today. Exposing the lie. In this book, I expose this progressive narrative as a lie. In reality, the Democratic Party is now what it has been from the beginning, the party of subjugation, oppression, exploitation, and theft. The Democrats are not the party of justice or equality, but rather of systematic injustice and inequality. Far from championing the cause of women, blacks, and other minorities, Democrats have historically brutalized, segregated, exploited, and murdered the most vulnerable members of our society. During all this time, the main opposition to these horrors on the part of the Democratic Party came from Republicans. This book makes an astonishing claim. Of all Americans, Republicans are the ones who have the least reason to feel guilty about slavery or racism. This claim comes as a surprise because Republicans are the ones who are regularly chastised by progressives for their alleged bigotry. Let's see who the real bigots are. From the beginning, Republicans have been the good guys, fighting to stop Democratic schemes of exploitation, murder, and plunder. Republicans fought a great war, and hundreds of thousands of them died to thwart the nefarious practices of the Democrats. Even after slavery, Republicans fought vigorously, though not always successfully, to defeat Democratic schemes of segregation and racial terrorism. The bad guys, the Democrats, put up a great fight, but the Republicans won in the end. It was Republicans who made possible the civil rights laws that finally and belatedly secured equal rights for blacks and other minorities. Democrats are the ones who bitterly resisted the civil rights movement, and had the Democrats been the only party in America at the time, none of these laws, from the Civil Rights Act to the Voting Rights Act to the Fair Housing Bill, would have passed. As I will show, American history is really the story of Democratic malefactors and Republican heroes. I begin with Andrew Jackson. He, not Thomas Jefferson or FDR, is the true founder of the modern Democratic Party. Progressives today are divided about Jackson. Some, like Walter Russell Meade, admire Jackson as a man of the people, but trace the Jacksonian legacy today not to the Democratic Party, but to Donald Trump. Most progressives are simply uncomfortable with Jackson. Some now want to remove him from the $20 bill and erase him from our collective memory. He was, in this view, a very bad American. I support the debunking of Jackson, but not because he was a bad American, rather because he was a typical crooked Democrat. Jackson established the Democratic Party as the party of theft. He mastered the art of stealing land from the Indians and then selling it at giveaway prices to white settlers. Jackson's expectation was that those people would support him politically, as indeed they did. Jackson was indeed a man of the people, but his popularity was that of a gang leader who distributes his spoils in exchange for loyalty on the part of those who benefit from his crimes. Jackson also figured out how to benefit personally from his land stealing. Like Hillary Clinton, he started out broke and then became one of the richest people in the country. How? Jackson and his partners and cronies made early bids on Indian land, sometimes even before the Indians had been evacuated from that land. They acquired the land for little or nothing, and later sold it for a handsome profit. Remarkably, the roots of the Clinton Foundation can be found in the land-stealing policies of America's first Democratic president. My next chapter shows how the Democrats were the party of slavery and how the slave owner mentality continues to shape the policies of Democratic leaders today. The point isn't that the Democrats invented slavery, which is an ancient institution that far predates America. Rather, Democrats like Senator John C. Calhoun invented a new justification for slavery as a positive good. For the first time in history, Democrats insisted that slavery wasn't just beneficial for masters. They said it was also good for the slaves. Today, progressive pundits attempt to conceal Democratic complicity in slavery by blaming slavery on the South. These people have spun a whole history that portrays the slavery battle as one between the anti-slavery North and the pro-slavery South. This, of course, benefits Democrats today, because today the Democratic Party's main strength is in the North and the Republican Party's main strength is in the South. But I blow the Democrats' cover by showing that the slavery debate was not mainly a North-South issue. It was actually a contest between the pro-slavery Democrats and the anti-slavery Republicans. How can I make such an outrageous statement? Let's begin by recalling that Northern Democrats like Stephen Douglas protected slavery, while most Southerners didn't own slaves. 3/4 of those who fought in the Civil War on the Confederate side had no slaves and weren't fighting to protect slavery. Republicans, meanwhile, to one degree or another, all opposed slavery. The party itself was founded to stop slavery. Of course, there were a range of views among Republicans, from abolitionists who sought to end slavery immediately to mainstream Republicans like Abraham Lincoln, who recognized that this was both constitutionally and politically impossible and focused on arresting slavery's extension into the new territories. This was the platform on which Lincoln won the 1860 election. The real clash was between the Democrats, Northern and Southern, who supported slavery, and the Republicans across the country who opposed it. As Lincoln summarized it in his first inaugural address, one side believes slavery is right and ought to be extended, and the other believes it is wrong and ought to be restricted. This, Lincoln said, is the only substantial dispute. And this, ultimately, was what the Civil War was all about. In the end, of course, Republicans ended slavery and permanently outlawed it through the 13th Amendment. Democrats responded by opposing the amendment, and a group of them assassinated the man they held responsible for emancipation, Abraham Lincoln. Over the Democrats' opposition, Republicans passed the 14th Amendment securing for blacks equal rights under the law, and the 15th Amendment giving blacks the right to vote. Defending the criminals. Confronted with these facts, progressives act like the lawyer who is presented with the murder weapon belonging to his client. Darn, he says to himself, I better think fast. Yes, he now admits, my client did murder the clerk and rob the store, but he didn't kill all those other people who were also found dead at the scene. In other words, progressives who are forced to acknowledge the Democratic Party's pro-slavery history promptly respond, we admit to being the party of slavery, and we did uphold the institution for more than a century, but slavery ended in 1865, so all of this was such a long time ago. You can't blame us now for the antebellum crimes of the Democratic Party. Yes, but what about the postbellum crimes of the Democratic Party? My slavery chapter is followed by a chapter on segregation and the Ku Klux Klan. Democrats in the 1880s invented segregation and Jim Crow laws that lasted through the 1960s. Democrats also came up with the separate but equal rationale that justified segregation and pretended that it was for the benefit of African Americans. The Ku Klux Klan was founded in 1866 in Pulaski, Tennessee, by a group of former Confederate soldiers. The first Grand Wizard was a Confederate general who was also a delegate to the Democratic National Convention. The Klan soon spread beyond the South to the Midwest and the West and became, in the words of historian Eric Foner, the domestic terrorist arm of the Democratic Party. The main point of the Klan's orgy of violence was to prevent blacks from voting. Voting, that is, for Republicans. Leading Democrats, including at least one president, 2 Supreme Court justices, and innumerable senators and congressmen, were Klan members. The last one, Robert Byrd, died in 2010 and was eulogized by President Obama and former President Bill Clinton. Hillary Clinton called him her mentor. The sordid history of the Democratic Party in the early 20th century is also married to the sordid history of the progressive movement during the same period. Progressives like Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood and a role model for Hillary Clinton, supported such causes as eugenics and social Darwinism. While abortion was not an issue in Sanger's day, she backed forced sterilization for unfit people, notably minorities. Sanger's Negro Project was specifically focused on reducing the black population. Progressives also led the campaign to stop poor immigrants from coming to this country. They championed laws in the 1920s that brought the massive flows of immigration to this country to a virtual halt. The motives of the progressives were openly racist, and in the way the immigration restrictions were framed, progressives succeeded in broadening the Democratic Party's target list of minority groups. While the Democratic Party previously singled out blacks and Native Indians, progressives showed Democrats how to suppress all minorities. Included in the new list were Hispanics from Central and South America, as well as Eastern and Southern Europeans. Many of these people were clearly white, but progressives did not consider them white enough. Like blacks, they were considered unfit on the basis of their complexion. During the 1920s, progressives developed a fascination with and admiration for Italian and German fascism, and the fascists, for their part, praised American progressives. These were like-minded people who spoke the same language, and progressives and fascists worked together to implement programs to sterilize so-called mental defectives and unfit people, resulting subsequently in tens of thousands of forced sterilizations in America and hundreds of thousands in Nazi Germany. During the 1930s, President Franklin D. Roosevelt sent members of his brain trust to Europe to study fascist economic programs, which he considered more advanced than anything his New Deal had implemented to date. FDR was enamored with Mussolini, whom he called the admirable Italian gentleman. Some Democrats even had a soft spot for Hitler. Young JFK went to Germany before World War II and praised Hitler as a legend and blamed hostility to the Nazis as jealousy resulting from how much the Nazis had accomplished. Yes, I know. Very little of this is understood by people today because progressives have done such a good job of sweeping it all under the rug. This material is simply left out of the textbooks, even though it is right there in the historical record. Some progressive pundits know about it, but they don't want to talk about it. Such talk, they figure, can only hurt today's Democrats who, after all, can hardly bear responsibility for what JFK said or what FDR and Woodrow Wilson did. But don't we have some responsibility to the truth? Shouldn't we lay out the facts of history and let people make up their own minds? The progressive answer to this question is no. Progressives detest the facts not because they are untrue, but because they don't fit in with progressive political interests. Facts constitute, as Al Gore might say, an inconvenient truth. So progressives have been working hard to come up with lies that can be passed off as facts. Progressives have a whole cultural contingent: Hollywood, the mainland media, the elite universities, even professional comedians, to peddle their propaganda. From the television show Madam Secretary to the front page of the New York Times to nightly quips by Stephen Colbert, the progressive bilge comes at us continually and relentlessly. In this bogus narrative, Republicans are the bad guys because Republicans opposed the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. For progressive Democrats, the civil rights movement is the canonical event of American history. It is even more important than the American Revolution. Progressive reasoning is, we did this, so it must be the greatest thing that was ever done in America. Republicans opposed it, which makes them the bad guys. The only problem is that Republicans were instrumental, actually indispensable, in getting the civil rights laws passed. While Lyndon Johnson pushed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 with the backing of some Northern Democrats, Republicans voted in far higher percentages for the bill than Democrats did. This was also true of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Neither would have passed with just Democratic votes. Indeed, the main opposition to both bills came from Democrats. Most people know the 19th Amendment granting women suffrage was passed in 1919 and ratified by the states the following year. What few people know is there was a 40-year struggle over that amendment, with Republicans pushing for it and Democrats opposing it until the Republicans finally had the votes to get it through. Republicans proposed women's suffrage as early as 1878, but it was voted down by a Democrat-controlled Congress. Republicans reintroduced the issue each year, but for many years the Democrats tied it up in committees. It only got to the floor in 1887 when the Democrats again defeated it. Frustrated, the suffragettes, who were mostly Republican, took the issue to the states. By 1900, several Republican-dominated states granted women the right to vote. In 1916, Montana Republican Jeanette Rankin became the first woman elected to Congress. Congress, however, only took up the issue again in 1914, when it was again rejected by Senate Democrats. Only when the GOP won landslide majorities in both houses in 1918 did the 19th Amendment finally have the necessary two-thirds majority to pass. President Woodrow Wilson, who had led his party's opposition to women's suffrage, gave in when he saw its inevitability. The Democrats, however, took their opposition to the states, and 8 of the 9 no votes on the 19th Amendment came from Democrat-controlled state legislatures. So the GOP is responsible for women having the right to vote. The inclusion of women in the 1964 Civil Rights Act was, oddly enough, the work of a group of racist, chauvinist Democrats. Led by Democratic Congressman Howard Smith of Virginia, this group was looking to defeat the Civil Rights Act. Smith proposed to amend the legislation and add sex to race as a category protected against discrimination. Smith's Democratic buddies roared with laughter when he offered his one-word amendment. They thought it would make the whole civil rights thing so ridiculous that no sane person would go along with it. One scholar noted that Smith's amendment stimulated several hours of humorous debate among racist, chauvinist Democrats. But to their amazement, the amended version of the bill passed. It bears repeating that Republicans provided the margin of victory that extended civil rights protection both to minorities and to women. A larger deception. The canard about the civil rights movement is embedded within a larger deception that progressives uniformly put forward. This deception is intended to defuse the sordid history of the Democratic Party's 2-century involvement in a parade of evils from slavery to segregation to lynching to forced sterilization to support for fascism to the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. All these horrors are the work of the Democratic Party. Progressive Democrats seek to escape responsibility for all this with their tale of the big switch. Initially devised by progressives like Dan Carter and Earl and Merle Black, the big switch can be understood as a last-ditch attempt to rescue progressive and Democratic Party history. This progressive defense is akin to the lawyer who says, "Yes, my client shot the clerk and killed all those people, but since then he has completely reformed and now lives a blameless life. Meanwhile, his accusers have all become criminals." Actually, even if that were true, the man should still be held to account for what he did. He should be expected to make a confession of his crimes and make some reparation to his victims and to society. Progressives, of course, have no intention of doing any of this. Neither do Democrats. Whenever these people talk about reparations, they want America to pay. But America didn't commit these crimes. They did. They're the ones who should be held accountable. Back to the big switch. The basic idea is that starting with the civil rights movement, Democrats saw the light and became the good guys, while Republicans became the bad guys. What happened to all the racist Southern Democrats? Look, say the progressives, they all became Republicans. That's why the South today is largely Republican. This would seem to support the progressive storyline. The narrative of the big switch has one more thing going for it. Blacks, who once voted overwhelmingly Republican, now vote overwhelmingly Democratic. This is a switch, and it would seem to go along with the idea that Republicans used to be friendly to black interests, but now Democrats are. Why else would 90% of blacks today support the Democratic Party? This book takes on the narrative of the big switch and debunks it as the final and most ingenious installment of the progressive lie. In reality, there was no switch. For the film that accompanies this book, I made a list of 1,500 racist Democrats, a list that includes members of Congress, governors, appellate and Supreme Court justices, and all the notorious figures who opposed the civil rights movement. Of this group, I count exactly 14, less than 1%, who switched to the Republican Party. So the idea that racist Democrats became Republicans is a myth. Of course, many Southern whites did switch from voting Democrat to voting Republican, helping the GOP become the majority party in the South as the Democrats once were. But remember that racism declined sharply in the South during the second half of the 20th century. There is quite literally a mountain of scholarly data that documents this. And this was the very period of GOP ascendancy. So as the South became less racist, it became more Republican. I provide evidence in this book to show that Southern whites became Republican not for racist motives, but for economic ones. The most racist poor whites never left the Democratic Party. They remained loyal to the party of racism until they died. In this sense, the data show that racism slowed the movement of whites toward the Republicans. But many Southern whites were not under the racist hold of the Democrats. As they became more prosperous, these whites came to see the GOP reflect their beliefs in economic opportunity and upward mobility. They also found Republicans more in tune with their patriotism as well as their socially conservative views. Quite naturally, they moved over to a party that better reflected their interests and aspirations. Remarkably, Southern whites made the journey from Democratic to Republican for the same reason that Southern blacks switched parties from Republican to Democratic. In both cases, the switch occurred for economic, not racial reasons. The black switch occurred first in the 1930s, while the white switch occurred much later in the 1960s and 1970s. In both cases, the timing is significant. Blacks clearly didn't switch for reasons of race because the Democratic Party was, in the 1930s, the undisputed home of racism. It remained so until at least the early 1960s. I say at least because I believe that modern progressive democratic ideology remains infused with racism, although this racism manifests itself in a new way. So many blacks switched reluctantly because they knew they were leaving the party of Lincoln for the party of segregation, lynching, and the Ku Klux Klan. Why did they do it? They did it because the Democrats promised them economic benefits. These benefits meant a great deal to blacks then living through the hardships of segregation and the Great Depression. Democrats offered blacks some of the same security that blacks had during slavery, in which the basic needs of blacks were met on the plantation, and blacks, during a desperate time, went for it. This was one of the most significant political transformations in American history. Long term, it has proven to be a terrible bargain for blacks. They have remained the worst-off group in America, surpassed even by poverty-stricken immigrants who came to this country much later with nothing. The inner city remains a kind of third-world enclave in America, and whether or not blacks realize it, the Democrats intend to keep it that way. Yet, counterproductive though the black shift of political allegiance has proven over the past 75 years, I cannot entirely blame black Americans for making it. They were under extreme economic stress, and they were conned by the artful pitchmen of the Democratic Party. These pitchmen said to blacks, "You have had it hard enough in the past. Now you deserve to be taken care of by the federal government." And many blacks figured, after all we've been through, this is our due. But if the Democrats were such racists, why did they offer to uplift blacks in this way? Here we find the true switch, which was a switch of tactics by progressive Democrats. Democrats had already tried various exploitation schemes after slavery, from segregation to lynching to white supremacy. Yet from the 1860s through the 1920s, the Democrats remained the minority party nationwide. A new scam. So progressive Democrats realized they needed a new and bigger scam. For 2 centuries, they had opposed and stolen from blacks and other minorities. Now they had an idea for how to do it to the country as a whole. The new Democratic scam was progressivism. Not the old progressivism of forced sterilization and support for fascism, but a new progressivism that turned blacks and other minorities into pawns in a grand larceny scheme. The scheme works like this. Progressives supply the basic needs of poor blacks, creating for them a new plantation called the inner city. There, blacks are provided with food, subsidized housing, medical care, and so on. In this regard, the new plantation functions pretty much like the old one with a few modifications. Under slavery, this was rural paternalism. Now it is urban paternalism. The slave master is replaced by the government, that is, the big house of slavery is now replaced by the White House. In both cases, it's a meager living, but there is an important difference. Under slavery, blacks had to work. Today's blacks don't have to work to inhabit the progressive plantation. In fact, they must not work, because if they become self-reliant, then the progressives have no future use for them. Consequently, many young blacks have productivity, creativity, even human dignity sapped out of them. This is the core of today's progressive racism. Progressive racism is dedicated to uplifting poor blacks to a certain point, and then keeping them there. The proof is that poor blacks today are about as poorly off as they were a half-century ago, when the progressive schemes of black uplift went into place. Every other ethnic group in America has dramatically improved its life, except this one. Blacks have delivered for progressives, but they haven't progressed very much themselves. This, I suggest, is by design. Several years ago, the black pastor and activist Eugene Rivers made the startling statement that today's young black males in the inner city are ill-equipped to secure gainful employment even as productive slaves. Rivers's point was that at least slaves had skills like masonry, carpentry, and agricultural skills that made them useful. Today's inner-city black males don't have any skills at all. They have truly become useless people. Actually, the Democrats have made them that way. That's because these inner-city blacks, though useless in the traditional sense, are useful to the Democratic Party, first as voters, and second as public exhibitions of the need for progressive redistribution programs. Under Democratic supervision, blacks in the inner city must remain poor because their poverty is required to support and justify the progressive scheme. In this sense, the hood is an invention of the Democratic Party. Progressive Democrats are fiercely protective of these dilapidated, crime-ridden neighborhoods. That's why they mount fierce opposition whenever some reformer proposes to give poor black parents a choice of sending their children to private or public schools. Here, the fear is that poor black children may actually get a good education, and that would liberate them from dependency on the Democratic Party. Progressive Democrats also fought welfare reform every step of the way. They were outraged at the idea that single mothers with illegitimate children should be required to work. The progressive scheme is to increase their benefits every time they produce a new child. That child, to Democrats, represents a future Democratic voter. Progressives do not want to change this system of intergenerational dependency that has been working for them politically. Finally, progressives scream every time entrepreneurs attempt gentrification projects in cities like Baltimore, Detroit, and St. Louis. No matter that gentrification would bring new money, new jobs, and new people into the inner city. Crime would go down, and people could move up. Here, progressive opposition is most revealing of all. A transformation of the inner city is precisely what progressives do not want to happen. So progressives talk incessantly about black uplift, but no uplift actually occurs, even though black neighborhoods are all run by Democratic officials, from mayors to school superintendents. In fact, the Democratic establishment works to assure that no one gets off the plantation. Now, Democrats are working overtime to create new Hispanic plantations called barrios. Long-term, they would like to have some Asian American ghettos also. Democrats have created a plantation model for blacks that they hope can be applied to other minority groups as well. In that case, black suffering would extend more broadly to minority suffering, a real political success from the Democrats' perspective. Why? Because minority suffering is the basic moral justification for the progressive Democratic ripoff. If there were no minority suffering, then where is the need for all the social welfare programs? The suffering of blacks and other minorities has actually been caused by the Democrats themselves, But in a crafty rhetorical move, this suffering is now blamed on America. And here we get to the central thrust of progressive education, which is to fault America with the crimes of the Democratic Party. Here's a choice example from Michael Omi and Howard Winant. The broad sweep of U.S. history is characterized not by racial democracy, but by racial despotism, not by trajectories of reform, but by implacable denial of political rights, dehumanization, extreme exploitation, and policies of minority extirpation. Well, who exactly did these things? Omi and Winant refuse to point the finger at the real culprits. From their point of view, America did this to the blacks and other minorities, and in recompense, America owes them. For Hispanics, this means a right of free entry and a right of amnesty for illegals. For blacks, it means the government owes you a living into the indefinite future. So Democrats propose greater government, which is to say, democratic, control over private industry and over the private wealth of this country, all in the name of advancing racial unification and social justice. Democrats justify their programs as the sine qua non of fighting racism and advancing civil rights, and define any opposition to those programs as opposition to civil rights itself and resurgent racism. We should take a moment to appreciate the political feat the Democrats have pulled off. Through a fantastic political and rhetorical legerdemain, they have turned the tables on their opponents. In a sense, they have done a new type of switch. They have switched the blame. Incredibly, Republicans, who are the party of emancipation and equal rights and civil rights, are now portrayed as the enemy of blacks and other minorities, while Democrats with a straight face present themselves as the party of anti-racism. The people who have been fighting bigotry for 2 centuries have somehow become the new bigots. Meanwhile, and this mirrors what recently happened in Flint, Michigan, the very people who had long poisoned the wells then showed up claiming to be the Committee for Clean Drinking Water. Poor blacks, we will see, have become the pawns and suckers of this scheme. And subsequently, progressives have attempted, with mixed success, to draw in Hispanics and other ethnic minorities as well. Their larger plan is to enslave the whole country. It's the greatest ripoff in American history. If this scheme is successful, future historians may describe the history of the Democratic Party as a movement from slavery to enslavement. Slavery and enslavement are 2 distinct, though related, things. Slavery represents a specific condition. The slave is quite literally owned by his master. Enslavement is a process. People are enslaved to the degree that they are deprived of their rights and the fruit of their labor. The ultimate endpoint of enslavement is slavery, but there are many points of serfdom and servitude in between. In this book, I will show how Democrats went from slavery for blacks to enslavement for the whole population. Even those who benefit from the progressive state become dependent on it and remain captive to their progressive benefactors. Meanwhile, the rest of us are forced, intimidated, and terrorized into forking over our earnings and possessions so that progressives can dispose of them as they see fit. In sum, progressive Democrats have gone from exploiting blacks to exploiting everyone. This is their actual big switch. Enslaving the population is what Obama and Hillary mean by the remaking of America. They want to remake America into a society in which progressive Democrats control the entire wealth of the country and citizens become serfs of the progressive democratic state. In such a society, all our major decisions are regulated and controlled by the progressives. Their goal is to own us, our property, our lives, even our dreams, and to a considerable degree, they already do. But how to pull off such a scam? In order to carry out their heist, progressives require the consent of a majority of Americans. This, after all, is democratic theft, theft that is ratified through the democratic process. So how to obtain that consent? Progressives need a pitch, and the best pitch is the idea of social justice. I should take a moment to explain what I mean by a pitch. A pitch is the line that criminals use when they require the consent of their victims. Imagine a gang that wants to rob an old lady and take her stuff. They could kick down the door, but it would be much easier for them if they could somehow convince the old lady to lift the latch. In that case, they would only have to push their way in. So the pitch is the sweet talk the gang members use to convince the old lady to lift the latch. I learned about the pitch in a federal confinement center where I spent 8 months in overnight captivity for my sins against the Obama administration. My crime was exceeding the campaign finance laws by giving $20,000 over the campaign finance limit to a college pal of mine who was running for the U.S. Senate. I didn't do it to get anything in return. I did it simply to help an old friend. For this, I found myself at the receiving end of the full force of the U.S. government. But since no one in American history has been prosecuted, let alone incarcerated for doing what I did, I should be allowed to suspect that my real crime was in exposing President Obama in my film 2016, Obama's America, and my books, The Roots of Obama's Rage and Obama's America. Obama hated my film, vituperatively attacking it on his website barackobama.com, and a few months later the FBI was knocking on my door. During my 8-month confinement, I got to know attempted murderers, drug smugglers, coyotes, armed robbers, the whole gamut of the criminal underclass. Here I learned how criminals think, how they organize themselves into gangs, how they recruit allies, how they come up with their pitches, and how they cover up their misdeeds. I realized there is a close similarity between these criminal operations and the long-standing practices of modern progressivism and the Democratic Party. A gangster par excellence. All this talk of criminals brings me to the main subject of this book, which is Hillary Clinton. So far it may seem like this has been all about progressivism and the Democratic Party, but Hillary is there from the beginning. She is present in every chapter. Her spirit haunts the history of her party because all the evil schemes of her party have, in a sense, become consolidated into her own career and life. Hillary is, in this respect, the dark id of the Democratic Party. Her husband Bill is as crooked as they come, but his venality is circumscribed by his ambitions, which are mostly personal, to be lionized, attended to, and have his private parts regularly serviced. Obama, too, is lawless, but his is a lawlessness of means rather than ends. Obama will bend the law when it suits his purposes, but his purposes are mainly ideological, to reduce America's wealth and power. These two are small-time hoods in comparison to Hillary. Obama is capable of gangsterism, but it doesn't define him. Neither does it define Bill, but it does define Hillary. For Hillary, gangsterism is not merely a matter of means, it is also her end. Hillary wants to be the crime boss of America. That is the only way to satisfy her unquenchable desire for money, power, and social control. As we will see in this book, Hillary is a criminal who found the criminal practices of Saul ALINSKY to be too weak-kneed for her taste, and ALINSKY was a gangster who found the criminal practices of the Al Capone gang to be a tad sentimental. In short, Hillary is the true Democrat, the gangster par excellence. I suspect this is why the Democratic establishment lined up so quickly behind her. While the Republicans had a real primary, hotly contested, the Democrats had a primary in which Bernie seemed to win again and again, but never seemed to make a dent in Hillary's lead. That's because the Democratic superdelegates were uniformly in her camp, even though there was, throughout the campaign, the risk that she would be indicted. Why? Because the Democratic establishment recognizes that they need a thuggish enforcer, and Hillary fits the profile. Hillary is, in this respect, more promising than Obama. One of the progressive Democrats' main complaints is that Obama has not been a sufficiently skilled looter. He did pull off one big job, Obamacare, but other than that, he's been mainly talk, talk, talk. Democrats are hoping that Hillary will be less talk and all action. I suspect they are right. One of the original contributions of this book is to offer a new interpretation of that bizarre arrangement called the Clinton marriage. This marriage seems to be held together by a single cord: larceny. The Clintons have been on the make since their Arkansas days. They continued their vile operations through Bill's presidency, which culminated in the pardoning of criminals who donated lavishly to the Clintons and the Democratic Party. The Clinton marriage seems to affirm the Bonnie and Clyde principle that the couple that steals together stays together. The famous criminal duo Bonnie and Clyde, too, had a complicated romantic relationship, perhaps just as twisted and bizarre as that of the Clintons. We may never know what the glue was that kept Bonnie and Clyde together, but what about the Clintons? What unites them, and how did their partnership come about? Here there are a couple of theories, both, in my view, mistaken. The first, occasionally whispered on the right, is that Hillary is a lesbian. This would explain her apparent indifference to Bill's carrying on. Strangely, the best source to confirm this suspicion is Bill himself. Two of Clinton's former mistresses, former Miss Arkansas Sally Miller and Jennifer Flowers, have quoted Bill as saying that Hillary likes girls. Flowers somewhat colorfully cites Bill to the effect that Hillary has probably eaten more pussy than I have. I have to confess that I cannot refute this theory, but I believe it is unsubstantiated. No woman has ever come forward saying she was even propositioned by Hillary, let alone had a relationship with her. Sometimes the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. The second theory is probably the most widely held view, certainly among Democrats, but even among many Republicans. This is the view that Bill is the predator and Hillary is the long-suffering wife. Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill spoke for many when she praised Hillary but said of Bill, "I don't want my daughter near him." This view holds that Bill is the big creep. This is the term Monica Lewinsky used for him, and Hillary is the woman who sticks by the creep since she is married to him. This second view is not entirely favorable to Hillary. At its worst, it depicts her as a kind of Camille Cosby, turning a blind eye to her husband's atrocious predatory behavior toward other women. But even in this analysis, the main blame falls on the husband. The two Bills are the ones who did it. The wives are merely guilty of putting up with all this bad behavior. In reality, I show that the Cosby and Clinton situations are quite different. Bill may be a big creep, but Hillary is creepier than he is. She is much worse than Camille Cosby. That's because Camille, as far as we know, had no role in orchestrating her husband's drugging of unsuspecting women. Camille is, at best, a passive enabler. Hillary's role can be understood when we realize that she is both aware of and involved in Bill's crimes. She facilitates them because she benefits from them. How does she benefit? Hillary didn't necessarily want a husband, but she needed a lifelong pitchman for her political schemes. Goofy, likable, gregarious Bill was the perfect find. But why would someone like Bill want someone like Hillary? Not for sex. She couldn't do it for him in the bedroom. Hillary knew that. If she wanted him, she had to make herself useful to him in other ways. Hillary saw early on that Bill was a sex addict who could easily cross the line into sex abuse. In fact, there was already one incident at Oxford that suggested he had crossed that line. At first, Hillary was appalled, but then she saw that in Bill's addiction there was, for her, an opportunity. So she became the active enabler of his sex crimes. She showed him she could cover up for him and clean up his messes. She took on the task of prosecuting, discrediting, and destroying the women that spoke out against him. When necessary, she played the role of the supportive wife. She protected Bill from the consequences of his actions. The arrangement has proven successful in that both Bill and Hillary have gotten out of it what they wanted. Bill founded his co-conspirator, who somehow managed to get him off every time, and Hillary got an addict who became dependent on her for life. Of course, she never considered divorcing him because she needed him. Without her slick Willie, she knew she had no hope of carrying out her nefarious ambitions. With him, she now has a chance to live out her demented aspirations with all of us as her victims. What are those aspirations? To a degree that Bill would hardly dream and that is unmatched by Obama, Hillary seeks to establish full government, which is to say progressive, control over the lives of Americans. She seeks, in her own words, the remaking of the American way of politics, government, indeed, life. Obama wanted to remake America. This woman wants to remake your life. She intends, in other words, to relocate you to the progressive plantation. There's only one way to do this: convert all of America into a plantation. This means reducing the whole country to the miserable condition that we now see only in inner cities and on native Indian reservations. For Hillary, this would represent the summit of her achievement because it would give her what she seeks: full power and full control. Of course, it's not just about the power. It is also about the money. Here, Hillary has already shown her talents. Her achievement as Secretary of State has been to carry the corrupt operations of the Democratic Party to a new level. Hillary herself described what she did as commercial diplomacy. It certainly has worked out commercially for her and Bill. In the words of Peter Schweitzer, author of Clinton Cash, no one has even come close in recent years to enriching themselves on the scale of the Clintons while they or a spouse continued to serve in public office. By contrast with the Clintons, earlier Democratic scam operations seem like petty thievery. Previously, Democrats specialized in big city machines a la Tammany Hall in New York and the Daily Machine in Chicago. These were local rackets that looted the city treasury. The looters, such figures as William Boss Tweed, made off with a few $100,000, perhaps as much as $1 million. Hillary, however, figured out how to take her racket national, indeed, global. Never before has anyone figured out how to rent out American foreign policy, how to convert the position of Secretary of State into a personal money machine. Hillary, with Bill's help, figured out not only how to shake down Russian oligarchs and Canadian billionaires by offering them control of America's uranium assets, she also figured out how to rob the island nation of Haiti in the wake of the 2010 earthquake. It's one thing to rip off the world's rich. It takes a special kind of chutzpah to steal from the poorest of the poor. Imagine what Hillary would do with her power if she went from Secretary of State to President of the United States. Previously, she at least had to answer to Obama. Now she would be a power unto herself. Hillary has already shown how indifferent she is to the interests of the United States, selling American influence to the highest bidder. I dread to think how much havoc, how many Benghazis are in store if we elect this woman in November. Who is going to stop Hillary, and how? Who will block the enslavement of the American people that is the political program of the Democratic Party? My last chapter addresses these questions. The situation at first glance seems desperate. The Republican Party seems confused, bitterly divided, unable to contest the Democratic social justice pitch and articulate a rival vision. Can we really count on the bewildered elephant to chase down and trample the Democratic donkey? There is no one else. The GOP has, from the beginning, been the team and the only team that can stop and did stop the marauding Democrats. The Republicans have done it for 150 years, from slavery through the Ku Klux Klan, through eugenics and forced sterilization through the Civil Rights Movement. Why don't we have slavery today? How has the Klan gone from a massive organization to a joke? Why do blacks and other minorities today have equality of rights under the law? The answer in every case is the Republican Party. Republicans can come together and do it again, and in the final chapter, I show how. While the threat is real, and this will be a tough election, there is no cause for dispiritedness. With clear thinking, political creativity, and simple hard work, we can meet the challenges that are before us, working together as we must, because our nation's very future seems to be at stake. This is an election about Hillary. She is the one who embodies the debased soul of the Democratic Party, and she is the corrupt, exasperating, tenacious, malign spirit looming over the United States in the fateful year of 2016. It's time, actually it's past time, but better late than never, for all good Americans to come together and perform an exorcism.